Hello, and welcome to the final lecture for English 421Y. In this video, I will focus on the visual requirements for the incident analysis report, which includes using page design consistent with formal, long reports, and the use of both original and cited visuals to complement and enhance the material in the text of your document. While this is a writing class, as we've seen throughout the semester, how you present information is often just as persuasive and impactful as what you present. Design plays a pivotal role in organizing information and engaging the reader, but it also conveys many of the specific genre conventions that readers have come to expect. For instance, formal long reports have traditional features including a large number of front and back matter, a title page, table of contents, a list of figures. While these organize the content, there are also standards that signal this is a report and that you would expect to find in any kind of report, including technical reports, white papers, etc. Thinking about how design functions rhetorically, that is, how design engages the reader and contributes to the message that you are communicating, is something that Charles Kostelnik brings up in one of the readings that we'll read for the final reading response, called supertextual design. Supertextual design elements, and here's the reading. Supertextual design elements are the global design of the document and include elements of documents that are usually considered exterior, peripheral, or unimportant, such as table of contents, or cover pages, or design elements. Kostelnik's argument is that supertextual design is rhetorical because it impacts how the reader navigates and responds to the content of the document, and because it impacts how readers respond to other documents that share similar genre conventions. When you read one report, you expect to see similar features in other reports. When you read 4 reports and they all have slightly different variations on the design, you can begin to see what is conventional versus what can be changed, what can be augmented. In Table 1 on page 12, Kostelnik breaks down examples of 3 types of supertextual design, which he calls textual, spatial, and graphic. I won't go over these in detail. I would like you to read them over and talk about them in the reading response next week, because these should all be familiar to you, but hopefully breaking it down in this way will help you think about their rhetorical purpose. But I think Kostelnik's perspective on how these work together is useful. Within a document, he writes, these 3 elements work in concert, modifying, complementing, and constraining each other while creating a global visual language that guides readers from the top down. Here, global doesn't mean international, but sort of from the top level, broad, larger view. Kostelnik's distinction between the stylistic and structural functions of supertextual design, which he talks about later in the document, right here, is also useful as it encompasses arrangement, organization, and juxtaposition, the structural elements, as well as tone, professionalism, emphasis, identity, and usability, the stylistic elements. The structural elements are what we've been calling organization or layout or format, whereas the stylistic elements fall under style, tone, and that kind of thing. These 2 elements together aid both in the navigation of the document and then how people respond to, think about, and use the document in other ways. Finally, Kostelnik makes an interesting point. Often, supertextual design is out of the hands of the author. In Activity 10, you may have noticed that a lot of white papers use a company logo or design scheme. This is common for technical writing, where it's often assumed that there's a collective author rather than an individual author. The collective author is an entire group. The individual writers' names may not even be on the title page. Rather, it just might say the name of the company. Scientific journals also designate a particular page design or visual style, which is why we have citation formats named for particular organizations. For instance, the APA style is the required style for the American Psychological Association's journal. We just use it because it makes a certain amount of sense, if that makes sense. It's not uncommon for editors of books, magazines, or newspapers to also have their own house style, which they use to change what the writer has submitted, and is often different than what the writer maybe had initially intended. I bring this up not to discourage you from sort of developing your own style, but rather to show you how important supertextual design is to how organizations, companies, and brands think about and establish themselves. A company is its identity, its branding, its scheme, its logo, its design, its style, as much as anything that they actually produce. So individual writers and designers can still exert quite a lot of influence, but they need to be assertive and argue for why certain design elements are important or necessary or rhetorically effective. That is, if you look at a company's design style and think, this isn't actually that good, you might be able to argue for ways to improve it, which ultimately might improve how the company handles documentation in general. As Kostelnik writes, sometimes all we can do is vigilantly attend to supertextual design, right down to the last-minute production details, even though absolute control may not be practical or in the visually conventional environment of a complex organization possible or even desirable. For Unit 4, there are many different ways that you can format your report, but certain elements have become standard conventions in most technical reports or white papers. I have asked you to look at examples of white papers in Activity 10 so that you can see how design decisions impact the larger document. White papers are research reports commonly developed by businesses or the government about a specific topic. While their purpose might be different than an incident analysis report, the design of the document is consistent with other reports, and there are way more examples of white papers than there are of incident analysis reports. So one trick that I am going to ask you to use in Activity 10 is to go to Google and type in white paper plus PDF plus insert your topic. The results will bring up a range of full PDFs on a variety of topics, each with their own take on the traditional report example. For Activity 10, you're going to be looking at a few of those and comparing and contrasting them to get some ideas of how white papers are designed. For instance, when I searched for white paper PDF mining, I found an IBM white paper entitled The Future of Mining. Unlike many of the federal reports that I found while researching the Gold King mine disaster for the previous lecture, the IBM white paper has a very striking visual layout with a number of organizational and stylistic and structural decisions. So you can see its use of colors, headings, bullets, pull quotes, subheadings, labels, captions. Even in their original visuals, they use the same colors, horizontal lines, boxes, and things of that nature. There's also a whole lot of white space used strategically to frame and organize content. Combined, these design features make the document stand out compared to a document that uses the default settings of Microsoft Word. Further, the decisions catch my eye and pull my attention to points in the report that the authors clearly wanted me to notice, regardless of what I was actually interested in. For instance, as I'm scanning down this page, I'm more likely to read this pull quote because they've clearly called attention to it. If it was just quoted like this in the text, I might not read it. I might skim past that, but I'm more likely to read it because it has been clearly marked as, hey, this is important. For the purposes of this project, I want you to develop a layout for your report that goes beyond default Microsoft Word settings or template formatting and allows you to make rhetorical choices about the supertextual design that impacts how your audience perceives the content and structure of your report. For instance, you might decide to add an accent color throughout the document that gives your report a consistent and engaging style. Or you might decide to use a two-column layout, a horizontal or landscape orientation, graphic headers and footers, pull quotes, hyperlinks, whatever. There are so many supertextual design decisions you can make, and each impacts how your audience receives the content of your report in subtle but important ways. To go back to Kostelnik, in addition to the supertextual design elements, there are also what he calls intertextual and extratextual. Intertextual design occurs within the text and modifies or enhances the text itself. So this is things like headings, tables, bulleted and numbered lists, etc. While extratextual design is mostly visual and is a supplement or enhancement to the text itself. Things like what you did for the Unit 2 visual instructions. So infographics, line graphs, box charts, pie charts, images, things like that, diagrams. By now, you should realize that what we've been working on with all along this semester fits into these different categories. You've been doing supertextual, intertextual, and extratextual design all semester. We just haven't called it that. I want to use that language because I think it helps us distinguish those three elements, because all three need to be present in your final report for Unit 4. Like the supertextual design, extratextual design features like a diagram or a bar chart are used strategically and rhetorically in technical reports to clearly and persuasively expand or clarify details that are complex, subtle, easy to misinterpret, or important enough that they merit repetition. The reason that I'm asking you to create one original visual and use other non-original visuals that you cite is to add extra textual elements to the intertextual and supertextual elements that you will also be including. So again, for this project, you were required to create one original extratextual design element and include at least one non-original design with proper citation and attribution. When deciding on the type of visuals to include, I want you to think rhetorically. What visuals would best support your purpose, engage your audience, and refine your argument so that it is received more effectively? Extratextual design elements can significantly impact how audiences engage with or respond to your document. So it's important to spend time evaluating and considering what visuals to include. Last semester, for instance, I had a group that submitted as their original visual an Excel pie chart and a line graph. When I asked them why they chose these particular visuals, one student admitted that they were boring, but he knew Excel and they were easy to make. My response was, if you think they are boring, your audience will also think they are boring and they're going to skip them. So what's the point of including them? Visuals are used in technical writing in part because they can more effectively communicate certain kinds of information, but also because they catch the eye, they break up large amounts of text, and they add a visual style and professional ethos to otherwise plain, boring documents. What I always tell people is that no one wants to read a 30-page technical report. They have to read it for their job or whatever, but you need to make them enjoy reading it to the extent that that is possible. You need to make it not a terrible, cumbersome, awful experience. The more engaging and interesting and visually appealing the document is, the less, I suppose, arduous the process will be of actually reading it. In the remainder of this lecture, I want to briefly offer some ideas for extratextual design elements that have been successful in the past for effectively pointing the reader towards different kinds of information. I'm not going to go into a ton of details here. If you click on the transcript connected to this video, you will see that there are examples from the Gold King mine disaster. I won't have time in this lecture to specifically call attention to them, but they are there just so you know. The first is a timeline. Some groups are looking at incidents where time plays a critical role in how information was documented, circulated, and received by the public. Timelines are a great way to visually represent chronological information and call attention to not only when things happened, but how they relate to other things happening at the same time. Comparison charts can be used to set up direct comparisons between one particular incident or aspect of an incident and other incidents or different aspects of the same incident. Comparison charts are tables that present information related to two different subjects side by side so that the differences and similarities become accentuated. While you might create a comparison chart for two different incidents, the subjects might also be more specific, such as comparing two different vehicles, contrasting different procedures used within the same incident, or juxtaposing statistics about different materials used in the design of a car, for instance. The third type of extra-textual design are maps. For groups with location-specific incidents, maps can be a great way to help readers unfamiliar with the location visualize the context for the incident. While the most convenient way to create a map is to use something like a Google Map Maker, I've also had groups sketch their own maps, add their own content to pre-existing maps, or use maps that are maybe more abstract. So rather than using a geographical map, they might be a map of time, or a map of a room, or a map of something else, like a section of the human body, for instance. A fourth type of extra-textual design are flowcharts or process diagrams. Many groups have selected topics where the order and sequence of events is particularly important. For instance, the Fukushima reactor disaster. The order of incidents is incredibly important, so breaking down what happened and what caused other things to happen is super critical. In this case, because what happened contrasts with what ought to have happened, or because there are conflicting reports about what actually occurred. In these cases, a process diagram or flowchart can be useful for breaking down each step, showing the direct sequence of events, and illustrating relationships between events. Finally, sketches, blueprints, and schematics are important. Given that this is a technical writing course, some of the information you want to communicate might be highly technical in nature, and thus difficult to describe in words. Sketches, blueprints, schematics, diagrams, and sequential images, or sequential series of sketches or whatever, are useful for communicating information that is often invisible, complex, massive, or just highly detailed. While you don't need to create a full set of schematics for an airplane engine or blueprints for a nuclear reactor, you might select a part or a component of these larger systems to call out in more detail. You might also cite a larger diagram that you might not have the technical expertise or time to sketch out yourself. And then I also mentioned sequential images. One of the most effective rhetorical moves in a report can be to show a sequence of diagrams or blueprints or whatever that capture changes over time, that show movement, or document an object in different states. It can be very effective to show multiple images or the same image with numbers or labels that show how the image has changed over time. I'm imagining like a rocket exploding. You might show the rocket before it exploded, while it's exploding, and where the explosion happened, and you might show the different pieces or whatever after it actually exploded. These are just some ideas, and the visuals you create or cite will obviously depend on your topic and what you are trying to communicate. But ultimately, I bring up supertextual design because all of this information, the textual information, the intertextual design, and the extratextual design, all fit together in the entire global language, as Kostelnik says, of your report. It's important that you consider not just each of these isolated, but how they impact and change and enhance each other together. That's it for today. Good luck with putting together your final incident analysis report.